can be intimidating dealing with dependent and indemnity compensation. Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and today what I wanted to do was I wanted to take the Dependent and Indemnity Compensation Program and, break down all the complicated BS and, I don't know, maybe give you a flowchart. But this program is a godless quagmire. It seems to be specifically designed to intimidate and repel the very people it's supposed to help. And I'm not 100% sure that I can cover all of the bizarre trips and traps associated with it in a single video. To get started, dependent and indemnity compensation is a tax-free monetary benefit that's paid by the VA to qualifying surviving spouses, children, and parents of either a service member who dies in the line of duty or a veteran who dies due to a service-connected illness or injury. And right off the bat, you should notice that there is a slight problem here. This is a benefit that can only be claimed after the service member or veteran is gone. Now, I don't know how things work in your house, but in a lot of families, it's the veteran who deals with all the VA rigmarole. The spouse, the kids, they never deal with the VA. So you can imagine that they might not even know that they're entitled to make a claim, let alone how to get started. So with that in mind, let me suggest two things. Number one, educate your family about the benefits they may be entitled to. And in a second, I'll explain how that works. And number two, encourage them to seek assistance from a veteran service organization. Do not try to go this alone. All right, so one of the aspects of dependent and indemnity compensation, or DIC, that's strange is that there are actually two sets of qualifications that are necessary to be entitled to this benefit. There is a set of criteria for the veteran and a set of criteria for the dependent. And goofy as this may sound, the criteria for the veteran actually changes depending on the type of dependent who is making the claim. In fact, the type of dependent actually determines the amount of compensation. So, as I alluded to earlier, there are three types of dependents who can submit a claim: spouses, children, and parents. And in a second, we'll get to the rules that determine what qualifies each type of dependent for this benefit. But first, I want to focus on the eligibility requirements for the veteran. For a child or a spouse, they have to provide evidence that the death of a veteran met one of three conditions. Either the service member died while on active duty for training, or inactive duty training, or the veteran died from a service-connected illness or injury, or they didn't die from a service-connected condition, but the veteran was rated as having a disability which was totally disabling. That final rule has some special caveats, but before I get into them, I want to just stop here and make some observations about these rules. Number one, notice that if the service member dies while on duty, there's no requirement to determine that it was service-connected or not. In fact, the next of kin is likely to have a casualty assistance officer to help them deal with the VA, and as a result, it's not likely that there's much pre-planning that a service member needs to put into this part of the program. But that brings us to number two, a veteran who died as a result of a service-connected injury or illness. I would guarantee that my wife and kids have no idea what my service-connected injuries and illnesses are. So if I die from one of these conditions, they might not even be aware that they're eligible for DIC. And what's more, the medical professionals documenting my death might not make the connection between a service-connected injury or illness and the circumstances of my death. And all that makes me think that it might not be a bad idea if your dependents were aware of what your conditions are. And then, number 3, if you have a rating of totally disabling, there's a risk that your dependents don't understand that they're eligible for this benefit regardless of what the cause of death is. Again, it seems like a conversation with your folks might be in order. Plus, you might want to inform them of these timeline thresholds that are relevant for a veteran who is rated as totally disabled. The vet had to have the rating of totally disabling for at least 10 years before their death, or for at least 5 years if the rating was effective when they were released from active duty, or if the veteran is a former POW, their rating only has to be in effect for 1 year before their death. In fact, now might be a really good idea to foot stomp the idea that, in general, it's in your best interests to submit a fully developed claim under the Benefits Delivered Before Discharge program. That's a good idea in general, and in this situation, you can see how doing that changes the timeline for these benefits for your dependents. Now, for parents, the rules have the same basic shape, but they're more restrictive. For one thing, there is no provision for a veteran who simply dies while having a rating of totally disabling. And the rules for a service member on active duty for training or inactive training require that the death be in the line of duty. And it seems to only cover certain illnesses. The bottom line here is that if you do have parents who are financially dependent on you, you might want to take more proactive steps to protect them. Okay, so that covers the qualifying circumstances for the veterans half of the puzzle, but now let's look at the qualifications for the dependents themselves. For a spouse, you either have to have lived with the veteran or service member without a break until their death, or if you were separated, you can't be at fault for the separation. Additionally, one of these 3 things has to be true. Either you married the vet within 15 years of their discharge from active duty when the qualifying illness or injury started, or you were married to the veteran for at least 1 year, or you had a child with the veteran. Now, I gotta be honest, I do not find this whole spouse situation particularly satisfying. I mean, it seems like the VA is lumping a wide range of spouse and spouse-like relationships under the heading of spouse to include things like common law spouses, current spouses, and former spouses. And then when it comes to things like separation and divorce and remarriage, the VA makes it seem like the rules are always changing. For instance, the minimum age to remarry and still qualify for DIC changed twice in the last 2 decades. And I can't really tell if a former spouse and a current spouse can both qualify for the program. And so what that seems to mean is that if you're not in one of those traditional churchy till death do us part kind of marriages, that a spouse may have to submit a claim without exactly knowing what outcome to expect. I don't know. Some of you guys probably have experience with this, and I'd appreciate if you'd leave a comment about it. For kids, thankfully, it's a lot simpler. So long as they're unmarried, under the age of 18 or 23 if they're attending school, and not included in the surviving spouse's compensation, a child qualifies, even an adopted child. Parents are also pretty straightforward. Whether they're biological, adoptive, or foster parents, they can qualify, but the real distinction with dependent parents is their income status. Okay, So I warned you that I couldn't cover everything in a single video, and I'm kind of leaving out the discussion of how compensation is calculated. If you're interested, leave a comment and I'll do a separate video just on that topic. For now, I encourage you to think through how you would make sure that your dependents were aware of what they were entitled to. Personally, I'm going to be adding a copy of my VA claim letter to my estate planning binder and having a conversation about it with my kids. You want to know something else that I've put some effort into making sure that my dependents have? My DD 214. And if you want to see just how challenging it can be for the next of kin to get a copy of that document and why you want to make it available to them, watch this video.